amongst the engineers, so I knew I was going to be well outnumbered. And I'm going to talk for about an hour and a quarter. Dozing is okay, I was quiet about it, but most people stay awake. I've got 52 slides. Most of them got nice pictures on them. Some have got dreadful pictures on them, bad track and things like that. But about an hour and 5, I think I've given perhaps some questions afterwards, and we finish, I think, about 6:15. It's 7:15. That's it. And greetings to everybody at home. It's good to see all this IT setup working.
14.
Good. All right. Okay, good. Well, hi. I hope you can see me because I'm going to stand here and hopefully be in shot. I am in shot.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's good. See that. Okay, a bit about me. I joined the railway at Leeds University. I was at Leeds with Mr. Abbott here. I was a geographer, he was a civil engineer. So we've known each other 50 years this year, which is shocked us both a bit, didn't it? And I went into the railway in 1978 as an operations side trainee, fresh-faced and innocent. And I finally hung up my consultancy boots a couple of Christmases ago, having done full-time till 2015. And then did some work on my own behalf. Now, my areas of working have been Yorkshire, Scotland for 10 years, South East of England with freight. I did about 15 years with freight. I decided I was getting bored of freight when I was about 48. So I went off to the passenger world and I ran TP yachts and then what's now LNE for a while. And then in 2011, which brings us up to why I'm here, Mark Hopwood, who many of you will know, asked whether I could come down and bolster his projects and planning team as he headed into the white heat of the rebuilding of the Great Western, which is another talk. But I have to say that Great Western, I've said to a couple of your officers this evening, Great Western was a project of huge contrast from some frustrations and some dreadful electrification to wonderful schemes like Reading Station, which of all the projects I've done in my 40 odd years, Reading Station is the one that stands out as the most satisfying because everybody worked together. So anyway, I was on the Western in 2014 and I was happily running a big team of train planners and a big team of projects people who were doing the train operating company input to the Great Western electrification, resignaling, all the rest of it. It was going on, not really kicking off in about 2011. Fascinating times. And one of the things which I think we tended to do within the projects is we tried sometimes in the senior project teams to sort of sit back a little bit and see what the rest of the company was doing, the rest of the industry was doing, and not get so tunnel vision down our project bolt hole that we didn't see the whole railway. And that stood us in good stead. On the morning, I think, of the 4th of February 2014, I had been, ironically enough, giving a talk on the electrification and modernisation of the Great Western to the IET at their meeting room at the Westinghouse signal plant at Chippenham. And it was a filthy night. It was horizontal rain. It was February. And I remember walking to the pub next to the station with the chairman of the meeting. And I had my big railway coat on. And I was leaning into the wind. And I remember remarking to him as I walked into the pub, there'll be some damage tonight. There sure was, because that's the night the wall fell down at Dawlish. So anyway, as I say, 52 slides, I'll roll through them quite quickly. Some of them I'll dwell on because they've got some interesting points to make. And I'll sum up at the end of it, hopefully what the lessons, or maybe the lessons will be self-evident about what we can learn from what's going on. So question number 1 is, where are we? Penzance. Yes, we're at Penzance. So this is the night before the wall fell down when I was on my train to Chippenham. Doing my talk, and this is some people as the dusk falls, watching the waves coming over the sea wall onto the track. You see the track is beginning to flood. The track circuits will be not enjoying that, and that was the evening before the night of the damage. So what happened at Dawlish and in the southwest and in the Thames Valley that winter is exactly the kind of thing that's happened, as you'll know, all around the nation since then, but with a greater frequency all the time as the railway gets soggier and soggier. Not very technical as a term, but everybody understands it. And embankments slide and cuttings slide and track becomes waterlogged, etc., etc. You are the engineers, I'm not. You provide me with the formation to run my trains on. And time again, my trains aren't running. And my passengers and my freight customers are not at all happy. The profile of Dawlish was extremely high, as you remember from news reports. And in fact, I think it was probably the first time that this cliche of the Orange Army arrived, and people began to see big groups of track workers as the Orange Army. And it became used by Network Rail as a positive, which is great. What I'm not going to try and delve into is engineering, because I don't understand it. What I'm going to delve in is how we looked at putting the customer first, the passenger first in our case, because I was away from freight by then, I was in passenger, how the fleet worked or didn't work and what we did about the fleet, and how operationally we had to really dig deep into our rulebook knowledge, using the word rulebook as a generic for all the knowledge we have in operations, to find solutions to problems which were suddenly staring us in the face. Right, black is bad. Green is sort of all right. Those numbers are the percentage of normal flow on each of those rivers into small drainage basins around the south of England in early 2014. So you can see that the percentages are up towards the double the flow, 200% flow in a lot of places. That's what was going on that winter. Everything was getting pretty soggy. And you can see, I mean, it's not something we usually think about, is these river titles, but of course those in the water trade do all their work by basins, flows, rivers, but that's what's going on.
Sorry, I've got somebody here saying they can't see the slides, so I just need to.
Okay.
Is it just one person who can't see the slides, or has everyone else got the slides?
Jeremy, I'm okay. I can see them.
Okay. And somebody else give me a. We've got Tony Knowles saying he can't see the slides.
Yeah, I can see them as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
They've been all talking, you can't see them.
Well, everyone's.
That's why, isn't it?
Yeah, seems to be. I think it must be a local problem.
No, they haven't looked back in again.
Yeah,
Dog eating it might work, wherever it is.
let's check. Yeah, Tony Knowles.
Switch it off and switch it on again.
I'm not.
No, not that. No, not us.
Okay. I think it's working. It just needs a bit of a reset your end, I think. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But, okay.
So that's what's going on with the weather. And actually, we all knew this. I mean, you probably can't place yourself what was going on then, but I certainly can, because it was, commuting up and down from York and sites doing the modernisation of the Western. It was really filthy time. And that's what's going on in the January in terms of blue is bad. Lots and lots of rain. Early February, that's the numbers there. But it was really the western side of the UK that was really getting plastered, and consistently. It was day after day after day of heavy rain. I didn't know at the time that Network Rail has a wave monitoring rig at Dawlish, and it looks at wave height and wave strength, etc. And it's never before gone black. But 2 days before the wall fell down, or within 36 hours of the wall falling down that night, the first black event ever took place on the wave monitoring rig at Dawlish. Never been seen before. So perhaps, who knows, that black event finally undermined the wall. It kept up for a day of traffic, and then it collapsed in with wave action during the night of the 2nd, 3rd of February 2014. So 12 hours after that photograph was taken at Penzance, there's another photograph. You can tell it's not just a bad picture in terms of film, it's a really dark morning. The sea is in the track bed. These are platforms. That's the old motor rail dock and the sidings on the seaward side of Penzance station. The signals will remain red for a while. And for some reason, nothing much was running. Sleepers had been stopped on the way down, etc., etc., etc. So I had potted into Milford House, which is where my office was at Swindon, from a hotel at Swindon that night. I stayed down here because I commute a couple of times a week, and we were all talking about the wall having come down. For some reason, I've not quite clocked how severe this was. I mean, it was severe, but it's just, I don't know, it's from the west of England, just Devon and Cornwall. And I hadn't thought, hang on, we've got Lera Depot there, on the wrong side of the bridge. So Mark Cotwood came into my office and said, what are we going to do about Lera, Mike? And I looked at him and thought, there you go, I'm sure. And from that moment, basically my project workload, I couldn't stop it, but it became superimposed on just day job stuff, but trying to get the railway running. And I basically became flat manager, I guess, for the Western to try and actually get over the problem. So that's what we all know. That's the picture that's been in 1,000 newspapers. When you talk about the Dawlish Wall coming down, you see the Orange Army track over the gap. All not very good. So we've seen that before. We might not have seen that one before. These householders obviously got a problem. You have to use your back door. But you know, there was a lot of damage in the town as well, and a lot of damage by flying ballast and the rest of it. It was a pretty grim place, was Dawlish at the time, and a genuine disaster locally for the town. Now, it's not new. This is the Great Western back in the day. A bit old actually, because, well, the train's on the wrong road and it's been split, and these are either passengers or P-way workers walking backwards and forwards. But it obviously has history. Now, I'm a great supporter of Brunel's, I'm sure you all are, but I don't think he got the seawall quite right. This is a bit later. And in fact, when I was looking through these slides this morning, I thought, hang on, yeah, I know how these guys feel, because about 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, I went on the footplate of a steam locomotive from York to Hull on a charter train. And we tied the locomotive off at Hull, and we went to turn the locomotive on Triangle Botanic Gardens and into Botanic Gardens DMU depot to fill up with water from the fire brigade pump that had come to do the job. And as we approached the carriage washer, you guess what's going to happen. We realised that it didn't have an off switch. So we took the LNER locomotive through the carriage washer. And thankfully it wasn't this old ex-mover that we used to use in the 70s. It was just detergent and water. So David Court, who was the driver, now retired, and I, proper fireman, got well soaked by the carriage washer and then by the rinse. Whilst the firemen were filling up, the proper firemen from Humside were filling up our tender, we sort of rotated like, I suppose we were like kebabs on a spit in front of the firebox to actually dry off. But we got back into Hull Station, asked a passing DMU driver why, and he said, well, we never have to turn it off, which actually you don't. But anyway, now beside the point, this is a bit later. And this is a bit later still, the much missed HSTs on cross country going up and down the seawall. And actually they could do it, whereas the new trains can't do it because they short out at the top, which is one of these things about having more complicated trains are actually less reliable. But this is the important bit. The press was all over that stuff, like the bridge, because it's highly photogenic. There weren't a lot of people out at sea looking at this cliff, so there weren't a lot of photographs. So one of the important points I'm making this evening is behind these press stories, there was a lot of really interesting other stuff going on. And this is the sandstone cliff between Dawlish and Timber. And what you can't quite see at the top is Devon and Cornwall Fire Brigade's finest, sluicing the sandstone down the cliff edge so that it doesn't come down in an uncontrolled way. Because the cliff edge was soggy, but not soggy enough, so they basically diluted it and it poured down. And I'm sure any of you who've looked after track, which is probably most of you over the years, this is not the ideal treating track. In fact, I've never seen anything worse, but that's what the bottom of the cliff looked like once all this stuff had been sluiced down. So to my colleagues in Network Rail Engineering on the Western, this was actually a bigger deal than the sea wall because the cliffs go on a long way and the breach in the sea wall was only a couple of 100 meters wide. But this was a problem. You can see the anti-rock fencing, which had been there anyway. And I'll come back later in my talk this evening about what it looks like now. So basically the sea wall is just to the right of the picture there. And you can see how deep the water is by how deep that generator rig, wheel generator rig is in the pond there in the water. Cowley Bridge. The rule book does talk about running water rather than static water. And if you have running water, you tend not to run trains. And we weren't running trains at that point. But actually, that's not new either, because that's Cowley Bridge back in the day. And there's a funny story about this. We were at Paddington a few months later doing a bit of a review of how we were going to waterproof the West of England Railway, because there was huge political backlash. You know, we need to reopen the Oakhampton again, and we need this, we need that, which I think is still running in the West of England, even though I'm away from it now. And Mike Gallop, who some of you may know, who was the Director of Asset Management for Western at the time, was sitting next to me in this meeting in Paddington. And some guy was giving a presentation on Cowley Bridge Junction and what was being done. And actually what's being done is huge numbers of very big concrete spacers have been put under the railway so that the water can flood through the spacers. What's the word I'm looking for? They're not spacers. Solvers, thank you. Now, one of the pictures he put up on the wall, and I've seen in your PWI information, somebody's done a very good talk on all this stuff. Tremendous. Right, brilliant. I was fascinated.
There's a video as well.
Is it? Well, brilliant stuff. Well, you know,
The link.
you would have seen this. What's your name, sir?
Dick Watts.
Dick Watts. Thank you, Dick. You would have seen in the papers that there is a lovely Victorian plan with Victorian copper plate on it. And the Victorian copper plate writing says that the railway shall maintain the pumps. And I looked at him, Nick. I looked at Mike Gallop and said, what pumps? Yeah. God, what pumps?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those moments you thought, what in the last 150 years has been lost in terms of managing floodwater around there? There were pumps. There aren't now, I don't think. But anyway, it's a lot more floodproof now than it was.
Yeah.
That's the Somerset levels. And I'd gone across there when it was filling up the previous week on a train. And of course, it's a really surreal experience with a driver going across that with just water on all sides. It's not something you wouldn't generally see in Britain. You might see in Finland or somewhere, not here. I'd ask you just to bear in mind that signal there and those location cabinets there, because I shall come back to those later. But as you can see, there's a lot of water, and a few days later, the track was underwater as well. And one of the things that colleagues in engineering told me, of course, is that rats went for the highest ground. So all the rats of Somerset tended to be on that embankment. So the flooding Pied Piper style towards Taunton. Maybe you never saw them. And septic tanks discharged and all that stuff. So it's all pretty grim. So we stopped running, obviously. And in what actually I think became a quasi-military operation, every pump available was sent from various places into Somerset. Big, massive pumps to pump out the fields and put it into water courses, which, as we know from other places, perhaps haven't been dredged properly on the previous 10 years. So the River Parrot, I think, was a classic one, which hadn't been dredged, and so it tended to overflow. So this was real high drama stuff for the population of the levels. Probably more important to them than us not running trains. Up into the Thames Valley, this is 4 years earlier. This is Hinksey. Traditionally has flooded badly. There's a lot of work being done to slightly raise the track and put culverts under the track. Which took place in 2015, 16, 17, just after I'd left the Western. But we did the access planning for that. And I don't think you'd see this now because the water has an easier path to get through. You see, actually, there's a culvert there. That's water feeding through and filling this. So I'll come back to why that train was running in a minute. And that's the geography of the Hinksey area. That the picture is taken basically from there. And you can see that because you've got open bridges, you can't just raise the track and you can't really divert the rivers. You have to do some really good fluid engineering design to try and get the maximum amount of water to flow other than over the railway. So a lot of really excellent work was done there with a lot of input by City of York Council, Oxfordshire County Council, Network Rail Engineers. 10 out of 10 to what they've done. I don't think it's completely flood-proofed. It's more flood-proofed than it was. And of course, that's a sort of important railway. Because as well as my trains on the Western, you've got no end of Southampton, the Midlands and Manchester intermodal trains normally going that route, all had to be diverted via Acton and London down the West Coast Main Line, which isn't easy, but that's what freight had to do. And Chipping Sodbury, always a problem, Chipping Sodbury. Keep in mind, I said this a couple of times, but keep in mind the sort of the look of that aqueduct as you cross the tunnel, and you can see the water course in the split-topped aqueduct pipe sort of flooding over the thing. Of course, that's electrified now, which probably doesn't mix very well, but at the time it was diesel. So that's what we're dealing with at Chipping Sodbury. So the job stopped at Chipping Sodbury. And the job started stopping at Maidenhead. It fell away on the release and then the mains. If you look at where the handles are on those location cabinets, you can make a judgment as to how deep that water is and how many relays and electrical gubbins are underwater at the time the photo was taken. You can see the sandbags around cabinets, try and stem them, but that wasn't going to work. And therefore, we have the Great Western Main Line, all 4 tracks of it, highly important to the economy of that whole slice of London to the West Country and South Wales, stopped. So whilst Dawlish was stopped, in economic terms for the country, this, whilst not photogenic, was far more important and far more deserving of our efforts operationally. So we put quite a bit of our resources into doing that. By resources, just I'll say in passing, we stopped having meetings. It was wonderful. We didn't have meetings. We cancelled meetings. I think we cancelled the board, because we were all dealing with this. So you can't run rail without lots of meetings. Maybe not forever, but we had about 4 or 5 weeks of no meetings. Everybody was out doing this, or actually out on the job, and so big stuff. I'll come back to we'll come back to Maidenhead now. It all worked. So down the River Thames between Bradley and Oxford comes the Navy to help. I am joking. And there's a crowd help. There's my boss who's in the crowd there. There's Mr. Cameron, the route director, the then Transport Secretary, walking down the breach. The rails are rusty now. This is the Orange Army's first outing. And oh wow, what a time it was. So the great and the good were down there, and us labourers, us workers, were actually trying to fix train services around it, but it got a profile and it got emergency funding from government. That's the important thing. It's also important to note that a lot of the work that was being done there meant other jobs had to be cancelled. So there's knock-on effects all over the Western and elsewhere as resources are put into the southwest or waterproofing things. So this is another generic water management slide rather than a railway slide. Now this is, I think, 3 weeks later. Things are calming down, but there's still a lot of water about. And I've made the point, I think, in another slide, that this wasn't a sudden emergency which was over in a few days. This was a slog, a marathon. And one of the things we had to do managerially was to pace ourselves so that we didn't all burn out in the first week working 24/7. We actually had, we managed hours. Safety what requires us, as you know, on the railway, hidden 18 and all that, to manage hours. So we had to make sure that whilst meetings were out the diary, we basically had to ensure that we could manage for weeks, not days, with all these things going on. Now, as a geographer, I'm delighted to be able to use the word PC-metric head, because I've never in all my career managed to do that until right at the end, which is this. But this is the cutting at Maidenhead, where those location cabinets were. And you can see the Port Track Railway there, and you can see what's going on with the water levels. And you can see why effectively this isn't river flooding or sea flooding into the cutting. This is water coming up through the ground. The water table is rising. Now the highest rise of the water table was near Battle in East Sussex. where it rose twice as high as that and started flooding the Brighton main line. But something about chalk meant it dissipated more, and we had it worse in the Thames Valley claims. So we didn't have quite the heights, but they're pretty massive heights. That basically the soggy ground was coming up through the railway, and actually it was also coming up through people's kitchen floors. And this is one of the insidious things, depending on the design of the housing, whether it's concrete floors or not, is that throughout the Thames Valley, a lot of people found that actually nowhere near a river, but actually water was coming up into their houses, which is a real horrible thing to experience because you can't do anything about it. You can't put sandbags down, you can't, it's just wow. So it's quite a big deal, well, in fact, extremely big deal. So that's what was going on in the cutting. That's why you saw the photograph that you saw earlier. That's what's going on. It's rural Dorset, but it's again groundwater coming up rather than river flooding in that particular situation. And this is what was going on. Now, one of the tragedies of the Western is that certain major things were delayed on the Western rebuild. And one of the key things that was dropped from the Christmas 2013 all-line block, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, was the replacement through Maidenhead of track circuits by axle counters. Now, at the time, we didn't realise the implications, but had that work gone ahead as planned, it was pulled about 4 weeks before Christmas, we wouldn't have had a problem because axle counters would be detecting trains, not track circuits shorting out with water. So it became a real important issue. And I think there's a degree of embarrassment in the signalling project side, which they massively overcame to their huge credit later on. So effectively what was going on is the track circuits on the ground had been shorted out by the water. All the signals were red. You frankly can't safely keep on passing the things that are a danger on a main line like this. You just can't do it. So the job was stopped. We restarted the job after a day or two with 5 signal section long temporary block working, but that had some safety risks that we were dealing with. And so one evening at Swindon, the Network Rail signalling guys, I was a project director, so next door to me was the ops director. The 3 of us sat at the table and we worked out a way of reopening the Great Western Main Line. And actually to this day, I'm still proud of what we came up with, because what we did is we did what's shown in this penultimate bullet point there. And then we sense checked that and safety challenged it from every perspective for about an hour or two that evening. It was a long evening. And then we called the relevant project signalling engineers, Jason, and said, look, we need you to put this in. How quickly can you do it? And it was put in from the late afternoon the following day. So quite incredible, really. So the reason for doing that is 45,000 delay minutes is big, but that's just the delays. There's the cancellations on top of that. I put that in for a different audience, but I guess you guys know all about track circuits and axle counters, so it's maybe a bit superfluous, but fundamentally it wouldn't have been a problem with axle counters. So I've used this drawing, which is going to be on a board for a few minutes while I'm just talking through. As an aside, in all my years, I never quite got used to the reason why a new piece of infrastructure was always red and a piece of infrastructure taken out was always green. I suppose into the psychology of the 70s, where it's always good to take infrastructure out, whereas in the 90s and beyond, it was always good to put infrastructure in. But fundamentally, try and tune out the greens and the reds and look at the blacks. The blacks was the steady state signalling at that time through Maidenhead, Waltham cutting by the airfield then. And we had 5 signal sections which we couldn't run through because the track circuits were down for 5 signal sections over about 3 or 4 miles, so quite a big deal. The screen isn't long enough to show 5 signal sections, so I've shown 3 signals and sections between them. One of them is there, and it's the old Uniform Romeo 28 on the up relief, which led at the time onto Uniform Romeo 27A and onto 27B. So if we just take one of the 4 tracks there for simplicity, hopefully you're looking at this on home, can peer into your laptop and follow it as well. So the top line we're looking at is pretend that's 5 sections, not just 2 or 3 sections. Fundamentally, 28 signal became a hand signal to signal. So a guy in a little cabin in the cess or in the thankfully wide 10-foot is helping relay to drivers the signaller's instructions. And the signaller's instructions will be pass this signal at danger and 5 signals down at uniform Romeo, whatever signal, obey that signal. So that's what we're trying to do, is to get it into the block safely and then out of the block safely. And when it kicks through the track circuit after the block, then you can let the next train into this emergency section. So that was the problem. That was the task we had. So what we did was on this was the red signal that the train can't stand at and was given authority to pass that signal. We assume that this signal is the one before the first one that is now working, which is that one. Nothing to prevent that working because it's got track circuits working. It can show green, double yellow, and red. So you obey that signal. So that signal and that signal become the critical signals coming out of the section because it's going back onto the live signal railway. So at that signal, we put a square distant board. First time we've seen distant signals on the Great Western Main Line for 60 years. We put a distant board there. There's a distant board there and on the down. And that signal, using learned lessons from a previous scheme, which is my involvement with the electrification of the East Coast Main Line through Berwickshire, is we put massively oversized signal number boards on those signals. So about the size of, a big square white painted board with a signal number on it. So it's obvious what signal you're at. So the driver would be told, that signal, up main 42 signal, that's, your signal, you're clear to go to Paddington after that, follow all signals. So I've mocked this up. This isn't taken on a day because you didn't think of doing these things, did you? So effectively, this is the signal on the up relief, on the down relief, which is the one before the one where you're going to have to obey. And that is the signal you're having to obey, down main 26 signal. They're all numbered differently now, but that's what it was at the time. So I've mocked this up to show how you would get to the end of the section and then leave the section safely, having ignored 3 signal sections beforehand, which are all bagged like that and out of use. So there are plenty of bags around the West, bagging signals all the time, but we bagged all these signals and we put those boards up. I don't think anybody ever took a photograph of it, so we're all too busy doing stuff, but that's why I had to mock it up. And we didn't have electric wires at the time either, which helped, I guess. So that's an illustration of operational invention and safety checking that we're doing is safe. And of course it was safe. And we started running trains. A reduced timetable, obviously, you won't be going twice an hour to Whiston and twice an hour to Cardiff, but you go once an hour to each and you have some Thames Valley locals. And it's even got freight through as well. So it was, and freight is important, just by the way, there, because as well as the passenger economy being affected by this railway being shut, remember that we're in year 32 of the million-year project moving the Mendic Hills to London by train. So all these jumbo stone trains come out of the Mendips, and jumbos is sort of 4,500 ton of trains, so the heaviest in Britain. They're really sort of important. You can't just stop them because building and road maintenance and whatever in London stops if you stop the trains. So they're running up from the Mendips, generally overnight, you don't generally see them, and they're running back into you in the day. But if those signals are out, you're not. And you can't just divert them via the southwestern or whatever. You just can't do it. Importantly, all these other railways were closing as well. I mean, it became a bit sort of, end of the world, really. Every 2 hours it'd be, you heard about Penzance, you heard about Broadland, you heard about Southampton, it's just stuff was falling away all over the place. Important because our thinking was going along diverting occasionally, and then he found that South Western has many problems as we had. Coordination with cross country. I recall vividly calling the production director of cross country on the afternoon of the breach, and I said to him what we were doing, and I said, would you like us to look after all your passengers? And I've never heard such a grateful chap. Bit my hand off. But it was important to me. And it should be important to all railwaymen today. You don't just run buses for Great Western passengers. Sorry, you're cross-country ticket, you have to wait for the next bus. It's not going to happen on my watch. It happens today, too much. So it does, yeah. So I put that rule down straight away. And what I basically said in my second conversation with the same guy, you know, we'll bill you for what we need to bill you, but we're going to put the paper labels on all the bus windscreens are going to be cross-country and Great Western, etc., seamless. And it really, whilst it was done nicely, it was, I was helping myself because I just didn't want to have confusion going on. I thought we at Swindon could handle this. Cross-country had all sorts of issues all over the country, so why don't we handle it for them? We love a crisis, and we'll see him again in a minute, but Andy Mallers, who was the engineering director at the time, who's now, for better or worse, running Venty West Coast, I remember saying, let's pace ourselves here, Mike, because this is going to run and run. I also recall the next morning, when we got our minds around what we were needing to do, inviting my train planning team into my office. I don't know why I did it, because there were about 25 or 30 train planners, and I had an office a third of the size of this. So I don't really want to go to a meeting, but I said to me, head of train planning, get them all in and let's have a chat. So we all squeezed in about the Black Hole of Calcutta, and I gave a sort of Henry V Eve of Agincourt speech, where I said, you know, really shit, can you help us? And to their eternal credit, that train planning team turned, they were just brilliant, because they thought through all sorts of things they needed to do. They had to undo a lot of the train plan that were already in the timetable and all bid and offered and all that stuff in processes. But they were coming in, you know, right through the weekends in big numbers to actually work through, this is pre-COVID, of course, to work through all the stuff in the office. And they stitched together and changed, and then changed again, and then changed a third time, all sorts of train plans to make it work. Absolutely brilliant, as I've said there. And they weren't there, but some of us might have been around when we see these other things going on around the railway, that generally, even in the post-privatisation, post-British Railway, when something really bad happens, the railway just does pull together. It's good to see. It's a pity it has to wait for that, but it's good to see. We learnt a lot. I learnt an awful lot about buses and coaches. I just didn't know anything about them at all. But this is a classic example of, we had withdrawn the sleepers, we've withdrawn long-distance trains, of course, because we just couldn't get through Dawlish. And we had it in our head that if we were going to replace railway services with road services, we'd do it really well. Usefully, we were part of First Great Western, is still part of First Group. We were part of First Group's bus operation, and we were therefore able to bring in two key sorts of people. One was the people who tended to use to do the road rail replacement buses, where we had to have all-line blocks. And the other was the boss of the first Devon and Cornwall, which was a big First Group operating base down in the southwest. And these two individuals were absolutely excellent in setting up what needed to be set up. And I'll show you the next slide how big that is. I can say now, but I wouldn't have been able to say at the time, that when the wall came down, First Group PLC, based in Aberdeen, were in the process, but hadn't quite announced, that they were selling First Devon and Cornwall. And had they announced it a week or two earlier, it'd have been far more difficult for me to actually use those resources, because they'd be, well, we ain't sold and what's going on. But at the time, they were part of the wider First Group, and that was useful. Look at those numbers. That's an awful lot of buses and coaches. In fact, they were all coaches. There weren't buses. There were coaches doing all sorts of things. 90 independent operators at times within the 3 or 4 weeks we were using them, in big numbers rather than just for the breach at Dawlish. They all made a fortune, but they were coordinated, and that's the important point. It didn't actually matter if Joe Dobbs coaches or Fritz Smith's coaches. They were a coach working for Great Western Stroke cross country on one ambition, and that was to get people from A to B. That became one of our problems. Fast coaches from Cornwall and Devon, Cornwall to Bristol, they were so good that we started worrying whether the passengers would ever come back to the And I think some didn't, because the M5 in winter, not summer Saturdays, is not a bad road.
Mm.
And actually the transit times were very attractive compared with rail. And I think a lot of coach passengers thought, oh, I'm going to stick with National Express next time, not get the train. But that was a sort of funny downside, but we went ahead and did it. And actually, it all worked very well. I mentioned the picture taken from the train at Hinksey. That was taken from a 3-car turbo DMU that only did Didcot to Oxford for weeks on end through the floodwater. That's all it did. And it went backwards and forwards through the floodwater. And in the evening, it went to the depot to get its axle bearings all checked. And of course, on a 3-car unit, you've only got 24 axle bearings. So it's tenable. You put all your trains through floodwater, you just can't do it. So it was a cosseted flood train. And actually, I think generally it's the same train came out the depot afterwards each time without, cracked axle boxes or whatever. So that was the flood train, as we started calling it, which went shuttling backwards and forwards to Didcot. And that's geographically what was going on. So here's the block at Dawlish. There's further problems down here that we're not running all the way through. And then we're flooded, as we'll come back to on Castle Carry on the back NH Lots line. We're flooded up here as well. Important note, Tiverton Parkway, just as a classic example of how good the relationship was with local authorities. And I think the relationship was actually probably helped by a guy called Matthew Galton, who I replaced at Great Western as he went off doing franchise bidding. Matthew had a wonderful relationship with all the local authorities of the West of England. And with the local authority for Tiverton Parkway, it took, I would say, just over a week for a new station car park to be built.
Wow.
Yeah. From we haven't got one to that field will be a car park. So that was built. It was loose surfaced, obviously, it's now tarmacked, but the car park you'll see on the upside of the line at Tiverton Parkway, away down the road a bit and on the right, is the car park that was built in that February 2014 in a week and utilised for all the people who were driving to Tiverton before that closed to get trains up to London. And this is the Thames Valley. You've seen the problems we had at Hinksey. And the problem, short stretch of track, but by heck, what an important stretch of track through Maidenhead. So that's the geography we had. It looks a bit funny going to Gatwick Airport, but that's actually the Great Western Tox geography at the time. So that's the map I used as a base. That's what we got up to in terms of customer care. We were passionate about it, I have to say. It sounds a bit of a cliche, really, but this was really customer focused. It wasn't operating focused. It was trying to get things done. We had all the stuff in the second bullet point. The war room in one of the meeting rooms at Milford House at Swindon. It was manned 3/7, and then it came day shift only. And we did all sorts of other things like free coffee and stuff like that. We did all those things for ticket holders and season ticket holders. We ran special buses for the school trains on the Paynton branch. We did all sorts of stuff. We recruited a lot of students into the call centre at Plymouth to do refunds because we're 1,000% higher than it used to be. So we did all that in the background just to keep the customer happy. Now, here was the problem that I'd forgotten until a couple of hours after I got to work on the 3rd of February. And this was the fact that Lera Depot was the wrong side of the breach. Lera is a big depot, always had been. And it had 8 HSTs, 9 local trains and 4 cross-country West HSTs or Voyagers sitting in the wrong side of the breach with no way of getting to the rest of the railway. So we ran 102 vehicles out of Cornwall. They weren't the local trains, we kept them down there, but HST power cars. I think we took a couple of cross-country units as well. And they came out of Lera, up the M5, generally to Bristol, some to Old Oak Common, which was open at the time, to get those trains out of Cornwall and into use elsewhere. And the great thing about this crisis was how good the unions were. So the unions for the workshops, Unison, etc., RMT, couldn't have been more helpful. They just, it was wonderful. It was like we had a war on. They helped rejig rosters. We put Lera crews in hotels in Bristol and London, West London for our local. No problems at all. A lot of people working in depots that are unfamiliar with the movement scene or the nuances of where the tools are, all the rest of it. Not one safety incident attributed to foreign engineers being in a different depot than one they're used to. So safety was not compromised. And I have to say that theme of safety, talked about Waltham cutting, but Andy, who's here, will be talking about the mech eng safety, making sure that in a crisis we didn't let that slip at all. There's Andy with an HST power car, and there's the sheer scale of Lera. I think that picture must have been taken early on Christmas Day morning. It's not, you don't have many trains in it. But as you say, it's not some small shed. It's a busy place. I think it's actually busier then than it is now, but it's a busy place. And you can see the sort of scale of the problem of having all your resources down there and no way of getting them to Paddington or anywhere else come to that. So Andy tells a story. It's not a very good picture of that, but he tells a story of on the first Sunday he was driving from Swindon down to Lera, down the M5 over the big flyover over Avonmouth docks and the docks at Swindon, at Bristol. And it's filthy, it's horizontal rain, it's blowing 14 hooligans and all the rest of it. And through the murk comes one of Alain's trailers with an HST power car on it. And he glanced to the right, and the power car was the one named Glorious Devon. It was highly appropriate circumstances. So obviously only get one vehicle on a trailer, so that's what we moved. But the things that were moved were things which had to be moved, where they were in their maintenance cycles. Could they be left in Cornwall? Did we need them? Could we do other stuff? So an intelligent approach to bringing out into vehicles. In terms of stakeholders, we spent a lot of time in Western. I've worked in two other passenger train operating companies since privatisation, and I have to say that, yeah, LNER was pretty good, but these guys in Western have really got it sorted with local authorities, partly through the work of the guy I mentioned earlier, Matthew. But they knew all the MPs. There's lots of. They didn't have to introduce themselves. They saw the problem, and you had local authorities phoning Swindon and saying, "Hey, Matthew, what are we going to do?" And this kind of thing. So the interface was actually immediately generated, and that's how we dealt with it. Ben Bradshaw was MP for Exeter, he's now not, but he was a leading light in things like the Cowley Bridge reactions and the support we gave him in terms of looking at the future. That's typical scenes. That's the chief executive of the first group there. Happens to be chatting to one of the ladies on the information side at, I think, Plymouth Station. And my words chosen properly and carefully there, because they are really important. I think that we did everything we could with the customer needs in mind. It wasn't just the rower was sorted. And that's where 11 years later, I can still stand here and be proud of that. And it's gratification that we did it from that perspective. I mentioned that signal on the Somerset levels, and that is that signal, the one that was being passed by the HST in that just before the line closure. And you can see there is exactly the Maidenhead arrangements in place on the Somerset levels during the latter stages of the flooding. You can see the live belt. And one thing I didn't mention is the T-board there for the temporary speed restriction. We actually, I remember sitting there that evening in Swindon when we were sorting out Maidenhead. And I thought, is there another mitigation we can have here? And so I said, I think I probably went over the top, but I said, let us put a 50 TSR on the line leading to the exit signal from that emergency section. So that we just belt and braces up. In retrospect, I'm not sure we needed it, but we did that. 4 TSRs on the Great Western line for that. Obviously, somebody decided to. I didn't do this one, but somebody else decided, well, we just put the TSR on there as well. And then, of course, we wheel forward now, coming to the end of the slides. You'll be delighted here. We wheel forward to what are we doing about it, and that's not a finished job. You'll be pleased to hear. It was buried into ETX underneath, once they dug the ETX to get floodwater through. But you can see the changed channels that have been put on the fields, and as you will know as well as I, if the farmer starts ploughing his fields at right angle to the railway, wrong horizontal to the railway, you're more likely to get floodwater on the railway. And things like that, liaison with farmers about how they're managing their land next to the railway. But if you've got a drainage channel like that, you don't need to worry too much about it. But that was completely flooded, which is why that line was yellow on the second map I showed you earlier. And this is the stuff that was high profile. It was a Dutch barge, came in from Rotterdam at some incredible daily hire rate, I'm sure. And that's it there. And that stood off the coast of Dawlish for many months. And it was basically, you put the, it's built already, you put the legs down in the seabed and you've got a stable platform to work from. It's a very expensive form of scaffolding, like so that's there, actually. And this is what they're doing, building. It continued until a couple of years ago. And actually, what they built, whether it's going to work or not, I don't know. But what they built, I thought that looks pretty impressive. And things like the fiberglass footbridge at Dawlish, because the steel footbridge just rusts to hell very quickly, and things like that. I mean, Dawlish platform, I've got photographs, but I didn't put them in, of the whole platform covered in rocks and ballast and stuff like that from the storms. And this is an engineer's drawing from publicly available sources of how the structure of the seawall was designed. There's turnover there for the wave reflection back into the sea, the public promenade and all the rest of it, which I think at Network Road at the time wondered whether we should have public walking along there or whether, but I think the outcry would have been too big, so they did. And it says at the bottom the tow level varies, and what the heck it does, because that's it there. I mean, it's huge. I know that's in a real low tide. But you know, I'm not appreciated until I saw that slide quite how big this wall is. And it is big, you know. And I do think, from what I hear, there are still some problems there. It's not completely taken away the problem. There's the rig there. You know, it's the Dutch with their Euros coming in for that still. And that's the avalanche shelter, which basically was next to that huge sandstone cliff the fire brigade was sluicing down on the track. So it's been pinned, rock armoured and all the rest of it. The avalanche shelter there as well. That's just as it was being finished. That's again between Timoth and there's Rock, I think, on the way into Dawlish. It's a cross-country train going through it. And then, of course, it's more sensibly located, and you'll see this throughout the West and actually throughout the railway in the last 10 years. You don't tend to get a location cabinet on the ballast in any area which is possibly going to float. It'll be on a platform. So it's cost. And in the long term, it's not cost because you're keeping your kit out of water. And some work I was doing regarding, of all things, a reinstatement to the goods lines around Carlisle recently was, you know, because the River Cauldron at Carlisle floods quite regularly. One of the specification items was you put them on stands like that to keep the sealing kit out of the water, and your axle counter heads above the water and all that good stuff. So you can semi-waterproof the railway. You have to shut it when it floods, but when the floodwater's gone down, you can completely wrecked, is the philosophy. So we're almost there. We are there. I asked you to remember that culvert and that funny looking footbridge across the cutting at Chipping Sodbury. That is the same footbridge in the same cutting at Sodbury in 1930 something. And they're going through the water, which today we won't go through. And that's your talk. I'm done.
Thank you very much.
That's 55 minutes. Gosh.
Are you able to take some?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Have we got any questions in the room? If there's anyone at home, if you can raise a hand, I'll come to you.
I feel I've rattled through that a bit, actually. I took an hour and 10 the last time, so I have rattled through it a bit. But that's how we approached the problem that we had.
Question. Ultimately, will we run out of places to pump the water to?
Well, I guess we might. I don't know. I'm not a civil engineer. I don't know, but one has to take a view that engineers in the 1950s, so 1850s, 1860s were building embankments with wheelbarrows and not tamping it down. All the stuff you do today with packers and all the rest of it, how you build embankments today. So that that permanent way underneath the track is getting waterlogged, and it's slipping. And we can see it slipping in places. If you then deforest the embankments, it can slip more. So I think there's a lot of work taking place on what do you keep in terms of roots, and what do you not keep in terms of roots when you're actually trimming trees away from the embankment in the post-steam era, where in the past it get sort of burnt off, I guess. But I don't know. I think the key issue for the railway is keeping the embankments up and the cuttings from slumping. But where you'd actually, in the Somerset levels, I think it's a particular problem. Where does all that go? And I think there are two schools of thought, and I can't go for one or the other because I don't know. One of them is that you dredge these rivers through the levels, and the water then goes more quickly. But the other school of thought is that all it does is it puts the flood downstream. So a lot of arguments in the Somerset levels have been from those towards the channel, the Bristol Channel, and those not towards the Bristol Channel is who's going to get this water? The water's there. How do you take it away, and to where do you put it? Those major pumps that they had, campaign pumping out of the flat levels and into one of those rivers, well, they can't do it for the whole levels all the time.
No.
They just can't. So I don't know what the answer is. Maybe the Dutch had it, because the Dutch have sorted it, haven't they?
Well, they built the whole infrastructure below active water level. So in the Dutch village, you'll have the river running through your village at the top of an embankment.
Right.
Yeah.
It's called a canal.
No, an elevated canal.
Yeah.
Same through the Thames.
Yes, but they do have lots of pumping setups run by windmills, strangely. So perhaps we should tell Mr. Miliband about this. Use some of his windmills for pumping water.
Well, the other one, which is very difficult to see the answer to, is this problem of groundwater rising up the piezometric head. Is how do you stop that? It's an opening question. I don't know how you stop that. You have to you have to mitigate the effects of it happening. So you could get to a regime, let's say you're making a cutting, but actually you can live with the water up to halfway up the railhead, as we used to in the rule book, to be able to run through with flood water as long as it wasn't halfway up the railhead. You could do that potentially, because you're not you're axle counted, not track circuited. So maybe there are less restrictive alternatives for the operator of the future about running in certain types of signalling, axle counter is one of them, through floodwater. But I'm suggesting that in a regime which we all see, where any suggestion of doing something which hasn't been done before with safety and all the rest of it is, oh, can't be doing that. I put it to you that actually keeping that railway open is a better safety bet than decanting Mrs. Bloggs with a suitcase to go over the footbridge onto a bus and all the safety trips and falls that engenders, of actually saying we're going to close the railway, we're going to put people on a bus. But I'm trespassing into another bugbear of mine, which is all line blocks. I'm not going to go there. So, there are holistic safety approaches that we need to take, and sometimes we need to challenge them and say, but we could do this, couldn't we?
So, thank you very much, Mike, enlightening. And what I'm really pleased about is that whole railway system, which, by the way, the PWI promotes and supports, does it not? In terms of working across all engineering systems, but with the operating colleagues together, and the vision of working with bus companies outside as well. And I think that's fantastic that you put that over, Mike. And it is a big system issue. There's like sustainable drainage solutions that are needed, with big catchment areas that need to be analysed with our neighbours. And I think if people weren't fully aware of it, thanks for waking them up. And just one final pitch is, and don't forget our PWI earthworks and drainage course, which is
I was going to give you a
following up this very subject. And thank you for raising the profile.
One thing you've reminded me that I forgot was I need to give an acknowledgement to Network Rail regarding Maidenhead. The head of the signalling project side for Network Rail actually worked for Bechtel at the time. The guy who basically he was the tester in charge for all the resignaling, for instance, here at Reading and in the Thames Valley through to Paddington, Common. He managed to install all the axle counter equipment and commission it whilst we were running these trains. And we only ran the trains for, I think, 4 or 5 days through that temporary block for working arrangement at Maidenhead. Because he in November said to me, I can't do Christmas, we have to pull this from the project. When he found what was going on at Maidenhead, his team installed what they would have installed that Christmas 5 or 6 days after we started that work there. And that, I'm not a technical guy in terms of signalling or anything else done to that, but that was most impressive that he could just get the guys to do that and then do all the test and charge stuff to make sure everything was working. It couldn't be more safety critical, but he did it. 10 out of 10. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I don't know where to go. John.
A Cowley Bridge junction was an interesting case. My company, Hogg, we did lots of flood modelling for Environment Agency in that area. And the problem was hiding in plain sight. Because just about 2 miles upstream was Stafford Bridge. And one of the spans was blocked. So permanently blocked, constricting the flow of water. So instead of it going...
Nobody noticed this.
No, well, they knew about it, but there was the unsightly spectacle of Network Rail and Environment Agency arguing over it as to whose responsibility it was. So every time it rained, the water couldn't get under the bridge, just came down the wrong side and went over the track bed.
Well, I mean, I had exactly that just south of Heracon-Tweed when I was at the East Coast. That the culvert under the main line just south of Tweedmouth had been blocked allegedly by the farmer for years. And this type of rain came down and the East Coast closed to Tweedmouth. And it just, basically, he took all the rubbish out of the culvert and it just came like a bath. It was just like that.
Yeah.
It's a classic own goal.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that happened at
That was the problem, yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on, Richard, you.
Well, right. Oh, it's really following on from Paul's point, actually, about this cooperation thing. And I mean, this was 10 years ago now, in particular. Has that sort of sense of cooperation that was dramatically awakened by a huge crisis actually stuck, or has corporate memory started to forget it?
I'd give 2 answers to that, actually, Richard. I think the first thing is, in extremis, I would like to think it would happen again. But I've been away from, I don't know, I haven't been sort of in charge of anything since this, a big crisis like this. But from other work I've done over the last 10 years, I would have to say that no, it's not there. And it's not there necessarily because people are bad people. In fact, they're not. It's there because of 2 things. Firstly, that jobs are very much tunnel vision now, rather than looking at the effect of that job, be it ops or engineering or commercial, whatever it is, on the rest of the railway outside the company that employs the person. And the other problem is that those of us who started out with British Rail and saw the corporate railway and how if you do something there, that happens, but somebody there manages it, they're gone. And I would have to say in the last, I could probably put a date on it, the last 3 years, maybe 4, that reduction in corporate knowledge has become even greater than it was 4 years ago, by step change. But a lot of people have left the industry in the last 4 years and they've taken their knowledge with them. And I think it's one of the big things that will be working massively against the setting up of a new British Rail, whatever they want to call it, is that the people who know how to run a railway corporately and make the right sort of decisions that we were making there, well, they've never had that to do before because it's been, I need to rebuild tunnels, or I need to put CWR down instead of jointed track, or I need to operate signal boxes. They're seen in isolation. They're not seen as part of the system. And so if I sound pessimistic, I am a bit pessimistic, actually. And that's because of 30 years of disaggregation of people's jobs. And it shows the role of the PWI, the Chartered Institute of Railway Operators, which I'm a proud fellow, and other bodies, Mickey and the rest of it, whose meetings try and distill this cross-professional knowledge to people. And why, finally, before I stop my monologue, in first group I used to recruit the railway operations trainees at the universities into the industry, It's why that really needs to keep on rolling, and that the syllabus that these individuals get isn't just their employer's business. If they're working for First Group, they have a month or two with Network Rail, they have some time with the ORR, they do this, they do that. They spend a couple of weeks with riding freight trains around. You know, you need to do 18 months, which is what I got in 1978, of corporate stuff, I think, to begin to be able to put your foundation of knowledge on over the subsequent decades to keep on making the right decisions. And that groundwork bit has been missing, but the CIRO, PWI, CIRT are all the bodies which got that sort of responsibility to choose from word, but that's their mission, isn't it?
An altruistic objective against the hard commercialism of a company that has a particular financial interest and doesn't want to know about anything else.
Indeed, certain companies are better. I'm not going to mention it just now, but I used to, in talks maybe 5 or 6 years ago, say which of the train operating companies I believed had enough knowledge to do the sort of corporate stuff. And out of the 20 odd train operating companies, I could only think at the time about 7. And a lot of those 7 were based on particular individuals at senior level who saw it and knew it and filtered that through their company and out of their company. Almost all of those individuals are now away. And so a handful of talks could do the stuff that I think was done here 11 years ago.
You've been desperate to get to.
Quite early on in your talk, you said you didn't have time for meetings.
Yeah, they came back though.
I retired in the 1990s before the train operating companies got going.
Yeah.
And I used to say to people, do you want something done or do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, well, I think that's another angle of today's railway is that certainly in the last 10 years, the number of meetings which take place, and when I was consulting, it would often be the case, there'd be a big table like this, there'd be 14 people around the table, 3 or 4 talked and discussed, the other 10 were listening. Now, there's better ways of briefing than having that kinds of hugely expensive meeting. But it is what tends to happen. My philosophy on the Western, in fact, on freight and all sorts of other stuff I've done, has actually been cliche, walking about, or management walking about. I spent a lot of my time, yellow vest on, out on the projects around here, Reading Station and all the others, rather than sitting around in meetings. And I have to say that it repays itself several times over in terms of your knowledge of the pitfalls, and importantly, the guys on the tools on the ground or drivers or whoever else actually understanding what's going on when they see it out the window or down the track or whatever, because the knowledge levels are not well briefed within the TOCs or FOCs.
It brings back to mind that I've always understood that a committee must be an odd number of people, and quite often 3 is too many.
Yeah, well, I think I absolutely get it. I think, in fairness, there is need for meetings, as long as they're well structured, well led, have outputs, deadlines, and all the rest of it.
And it makes
And a lot of meetings don't. But there are risks, and in fact, just to give a bit of detail, we never cancelled the period safety review meeting chaired by the MD. So any meeting like that, we did. It's auditable, it has to be done. But it's nice to have meetings. They sort of stopped. And actually there were some downsides, not a lot, but you had to catch up with stuff and actions hadn't been done because everyone was doing something else. And that's just what comes with the territory.
Yeah.
But I would say that Great Western had no meetings for a month, apart from the safety meetings, and that's what we were statutorily required to have, and actually we wanted to have.
Rodney, you've been trying to get with.
You moved into a topic which I was going to ask you about. You mentioned Mark Hopwood several times. In 2014, he was, general manager was the title of the Western.
No, he joined the Western in 2008 as performance director under Andrew Haynes. He became MD in about 2009, 8 or 9, very shortly afterwards that. And of course, he's still there.
Yes, right. Well, he started his career in an office next to me when I was PW at Slough.
Yeah.
I've known him a long time, I suppose.
Indeed, yes.
He actually remembered me well, 20 years afterwards, when I was on the
So he's a
train.
Western man through and through, and
Yes.
actually he, I'd have to say that I think the projects and come to that to an extent, the operations on Western and benefited from the fact that he wasn't actually looking for you sort of working 9 to 5 and doing that, a bit of outwards. So for instance, with me commuting to and from Yorkshire, I didn't need to be in the office at 10 in the morning. This is pre-COVID when people are out of the office anyway. But, or you know, if I wanted to leave the office at 3 o'clock, go home for an open day at school, open evening at school, come back tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock from York, that's what I did. But I worked to and fro, and he allowed me the space to get on with being a project and planning director, provide a train plan to the requirements every time. It doesn't happen today, mind. At the time, we only missed 2 months out of 4 years I was there. Sorry, 2 weeks out of 4 years I was there. And to run the projects and provide a projects and planning director's report to the board every 4 weeks, and that's all I did.
Well, the question I have for you.
That wasn't a question, was it? It was a statement.
The question that follows is, what would you regard as the best organisation for British Rail? Or whatever?
Yeah.
I have been saying recently that the organisation we had until 1985, which I think you was, it started by this, and we had a divisional organisation in Western Tower where all our functions were
I would say the
various levels.
The best organisation was about 1988.
88.
When it was business led, with all the resources needed by the business, were under one particular business director, and the railway was really motoring. And then OFQ organised for quality after that 1990, it became a bit downwards. There were some sillies, but fundamentally the best ever railway corporate organisation about 1989 to 91-2.
So how do you see Great British Rail?
I have purposely, in my retirement, tried to ignore it. I'm just not going to get involved in brain power on that. So I do some other small commissions for people on operations and projects. Anything to do with Great British Railway, or just do some of that, I don't know.
Very polite.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move swiftly on from that, I think. No more questions? Nobody at home got any question? Okay, well, Mike, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Colin, could you please do the vote of hands? Great.
Thanks. Mike, I don't really know what to say. You've given us a superb talk this evening. Excellent. With humour, with great insight, and some real challenges. Many challenges. And it's just interesting what we were touching on at the end there about what's the right organisation for the future. And I think the concern, and I've heard it from you, it does, in a sense, it doesn't matter about what the organisation is, because I just worry that we haven't got the people and the skills and the experience to man whatever the organisation is. But what you've done tonight, Mike, for us as engineers, and we're used to seeing projects about the sea wall, but you've given us a fantastic insight into so many other things about the railway. And I guess most of us that have grown up in the railway over the years have always known that the railway was at its best in a crisis. I'm not sure that it's maintaining that, but what you've done is, at least 10 years ago, it was still. And my mind went to the Humpty Dumpty nursery rhyme. And Humpty Dumpty sitting on the wall, and in this case the wall collapsed big time, and lots of other things as well, but and nobody could put it back together again. And what you've shown us is how the industry did put it back together again in a very impressive way, with everybody working together. I'm just going to make one more comment, which is that this is very much a talk for our times. This problem is not going to go away. Climate change is here, and it's probably getting worse faster than many people think. And I just wonder, with all of the stuff going on in the PWI about conferences on making our infrastructure sustainable and able to cope with the changes in climate, that's great. That's really important. but I wonder if we're still not giving enough emphasis to how we manage in a crisis when the crisis comes, as surely it will again in the future. So thank you for a fantastic evening. It's the second time I've heard this talk, and to me it was even better the second time. So no, it's been really good, and I'm sure everybody would feel the same. And I just ask everybody to join with me and thank you for coming so far to share your experience with us.
Nice to be amongst trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that's an old picture. It's flooding's nothing new. It's
Where's it
been
gonna get
going for a
fixed?
long time.
When are you gonna get fixed then?
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Richard, next meeting, please.
Yeah. Next meeting, we can carry on this theme of coordination because the next meeting is our president coming to visit us, Mona Sahota, going to give presidential address. I'm not quite sure what's going to be in the address, but it's all going to be good stuff about, it'll be about coordination. It'll be about, there are 4 components that the PDI is particularly pushing at the moment, sustainability and 3 others I can't remember offhand, but all important stuff. So she spoke a little bit at the joint secretaries meeting in last summer when she was elected as president, and she comes over as someone who knows has an awful lot to say about a lot of interesting things. So it will be a most interesting meeting. So that's next month on the 2nd of March, I think. April.
We're in March
Is
already.
it March already? Right, so there we are. I think that's all the points, really, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That just leaves me to say thank you to everyone for turning up this evening and listening to this very interesting talk. Thank you for those at home. May I remind you, those who are watching from home on their machines, please leave the meeting so that once you've logged out of the meeting, the recording stops. If somebody stays online, the recording goes on for hours. So please shut down correctly, leave the meeting, and then turn your machine off. So thank you for that. Thank you for your attention, and we shall look forward to seeing you in April.
Yes.
Is it actually the first? No, it's the 2nd of April.
No, not the first of April.
Okay.
They're busy leaving.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good night. Bye. Thanks, Ray.
You were in Nichols. You was. We were there 70.
Everyone got that. Well, there was only I think Sarah was making about not getting the communication.
Okay, well, I'm going to shoot on.
No, cool. Yeah,
She was just saying to